My parents, in their infinite wisdom, secured a $170,000 loan under my name to enable my brother's extravagant lifestyle. The irony is thick enough to choke on, especially now that they're regretting their choices. But regret doesn't undo what I've just done. I'm Sarah, 23 years old, and I was beginning to feel like my life was finally falling into place. Fresh out of college, I'd snagged an incredible internship, and for the first time, I could actually see a future I wanted. I busted my butt to get where I was, and a genuine sense of pride was finally starting to bloom. Then, the bottom dropped out. It started with an email from the bank, buried amidst the usual junk. Initially, I almost dismissed it as just another automated notification, nothing important. But something nagged at me, so I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. The statement claimed I owed $170,000. $170,000. I stared at the screen, numb. There was no way this was real. My entire college tuition was projected to be, at most, around $85,000, and that was before scholarships. I'd actually received a decent scholarship, so the number was completely ludicrous. My mind raced, trying to logically decipher the situation. Maybe a clerical error? An extra zero added by mistake? I know it sounded like wishful thinking, but I was desperately grasping for anything that made sense. Panic began to set in, a cold dread washing over me. I knew I'd have some debt, but not an amount even remotely close to this. I thought I was being responsible, only borrowing what my scholarship didn't cover, working part-time at a bookstore to minimize my expenses. Where, in God's name, did this exorbitant sum come from? My immediate reaction was to call my parents. I tried to sound calm, but my hands were clammy. My mom answered, and I attempted to explain the situation, but she just brushed it off. "Oh, don't worry, it's probably just a misunderstanding with the bank. We'll take care of it," she said, her tone dismissive, like she was already mentally onto the next item on her to-do list. I pressed harder, saying, "Mom, this is serious. The bank says I owe $170,000 and I need an explanation." There was a telling silence, and then she started vaguely talking about how they did take out a loan in my name for my college education, but it shouldn't be that high. She attempted to placate me again, telling me not to worry, and we'd discuss it later. But I refused to let it go. I asked her point blank, "Did you guys take out more than I needed?" The question just hung in the air. "Did you take out the full amount?" Just in case. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost see the cogs whirring behind her eyes, the frantic calculation to find the least damaging explanation. Finally, she offered a flimsy, "Well, yes, we did take the full amount. It was just to make sure you were covered if your scholarship didn't quite meet everything." My own voice seemed to vanish. $170,000. The number echoed in my head, a monstrous, unjustified figure. My scholarship, while partial, covered a significant portion of my tuition. I worked. I had savings. Where did the need for that much money arise? The questions tumbled out of me, a desperate attempt to untangle the knot in my stomach. And then, the hesitant admission, almost whispered, "Well, your brother needed some help, too." A wave of nausea washed over me, a physical reaction to the sheer absurdity of it all. Evan, my twin, who'd traded textbooks for headshots, who was pursuing some fleeting dream of magazine covers and runways. He wasn't in college. He hadn't even considered it. The reality sunk in, heavy and cold, a loan taken in my name, a portion diverted to him. Anger flared, yes, but beneath it a bewildering confusion. What kind of parent does that? Why saddle me with this burden, this secret debt, without a single word of warning? My voice rose, sharper now, demanding answers. How much? Why not a separate loan for him? But she deflected, parried, the familiar tactic of soothing words and vague promises. "We'll figure it out," she repeated, a mantra meant to placate. Figure it out? The words felt like a slap. $170,000. And she wanted to figure it out later? We need to talk about this. In person. A reluctant agreement. I slammed the phone down, fighting the urge to shatter something, anything. I'd been so careful, so responsible. I'd followed all the rules. And now this. For days, I drifted through a haze, paralyzed by the sheer enormity of it. How could I possibly erase a debt that size? Work became an exercise in futility. Every spreadsheet, every line of code, was haunted by that email, by the chilling realization that my future had been irrevocably altered. When the weekend finally arrived, I forced myself to drive to my parents' house. A sliver of hope remained, the desperate wish for a misunderstanding, a clerical error, anything to make it all go away. But deep down, I knew the truth. Pulling into the driveway, everything seemed jarringly normal. How could the world continue as if nothing had happened? My parents waited in the living room. Their forced casualness, their averted gazes, confirmed my worst fears. They knew. And I knew this was going to be a long, difficult conversation. I sat down, skipping the pleasantries. "We need to talk about this loan," I stated, willing my voice to remain calm. My father sighed, launching into a well-rehearsed explanation about wanting the best for Evan and me, how they never intended for things to end up this way. But that wasn't good enough. I pressed, demanding specifics. How much did they borrow? How much did Evan receive? And why? Why? Hadn't they told me about this from the beginning? My father bristled, mentioning their dedication to treating us equally. But all I felt was taken advantage of. It felt like hours that they kept stonewalling me, and I kept trying to get to the truth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the truth came tumbling out. They admitted to giving Evan $80,000 from the loan to help him with his career. I was stunned. Evan didn't even bother with college, while I was staring down a debt more than double what I originally owed. Why hadn't they secured a loan in his name? I asked. The excuses poured forth. His grades, lack of collateral, on and on. I felt the anger bubbling up, but I knew yelling wouldn't solve anything. I stated clearly that I wouldn't pay a penny more than my tuition balance. If Evan wanted to throw away $80,000, that was his problem, not mine. My parents reacted poorly, my mother lecturing about familial responsibility and how selfish I was being. Selfish? I was the one drowning in debt because they secretly bailed out Evan. I insisted they figure out how to repay that $80,000, either them or Evan. I refused to shoulder that burden. Leaving their house, I was angrier than before. I felt like my reality had been shattered, and I was unsure of my next step. All that was certain was I wouldn't be manipulated into paying a debt that wasn't mine. Back in my apartment, the anger and frustration still simmered. It felt as if I couldn't catch a break no matter how hard I tried to do the right thing. I now had to figure out how to manage this massive debt without losing it. But one thing was clear, I wouldn't go down quietly. So, after that disastrous conversation with my parents, I'm sitting here just stewing. I can't let this go. There's no way I'm just going to sit back and accept that I've got this almost $200,000 debt hanging over my head because my parents decided to play favorites. I know I need to go back and confront them face to face, but I want to make sure I've got all my ducks in a row before I do. I'm trying to gather all the paperwork, all the numbers, everything I need to make my case airtight. The next few days dissolved into a blur of research. Student loans became my obsession, my enemy. I dove into the intricacies, trying to understand how they worked, what my rights were, anything I could find. It was utterly overwhelming, honestly. What emerged from the fog of information was the unsettling truth. My parents had taken out a significantly larger loan than necessary for my education, and they'd done it without truly involving me in the decision. That realization fueled a renewed determination. I decided to visit my parents again. This time, I was armed with knowledge and a plan. I wouldn't let them deflect, manipulate, or minimize the situation. I needed answers, and more importantly, they needed to understand the gravity of the situation. I wasn't their personal bank, and I sure as hell wasn't going to be saddled with a debt that wasn't even mine. Arriving at their house, I was met with a scene of unsettling normalcy. Everything seemed fine, which, frankly, only served to ignite my annoyance. It felt like they existed in some insulated bubble, oblivious to the financial turmoil brewing in my life. I walked into the living room to find them planted in front of the TV, seemingly without a care in the world. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain composed, and sat down across from them. "We need to talk," I said, my voice as steady as I could manage. Their expressions shifted, a mixture of apprehension and annoyance flickering across their faces. My dad reluctantly paused the TV, and my mom sighed, conveying the distinct impression that this entire situation was somehow an inconvenience to them. I launched into a concise summary of my research, outlining the amount I should legitimately owe and highlighting the unnecessary $80,000 discrepancy. I watched as my mom's face began to tighten, and my dad crossed his arms, settling into a posture of dismissive resistance, as if waiting for me to finish my little outburst. Finally, I broached the subject that had been gnawing at me. Why hadn't they simply taken out a separate loan for Evan if he needed the money so desperately? It was then that my dad finally spoke. He launched into a justification about how Evan wasn't in a position to secure a loan himself, citing his less-than-stellar grades and the desire to shield him from starting his adult life with such a burden. I was floored. "So, instead, you decided to place that burden on me?" I asked, struggling to keep the anger from consuming my voice. I worked incredibly hard to get into school, to earn that scholarship, and now I'm the one who has to foot the bill for Evan's choices? My dad's defensiveness escalated. He launched into a familiar refrain about how they'd always strived to treat us equally, insisting they hadn't intended for things to unfold this way. But their words rang hollow. It felt anything but equal. It felt like I was being used as a safety net to cushion Evan's missteps. I drew a line in the sand, stating unequivocally that I would not be responsible for repaying the $80,000 they had essentially gifted to him. My mom's face drained of color, and I saw tears welling in her eyes. But I refused to be swayed. I recognized the tactic, the guilt trip, the attempt to paint me as selfish for prioritizing my own financial well-being. She launched into the well-worn, "We did this for the family" speech, reiterating their desire to ensure Evan had the same opportunities for success that I did. I countered, asking her to explain how handing Evan $80,000 to spend God knows where was equivalent to my diligently using loan money to pursue an actual education. Her response was just a torrent of tears, a non-answer that only amplified my frustration. Dad, predictably, jumped to her defense, accusing me of being insensitive, of not grasping the immense pressure they had been under. But what about the pressure crushing me now? I'm the one staring down the barrel of this enormous debt, the one who will be making payments until who knows when. That reality seems completely lost on them. We argued back and forth, a seemingly endless cycle. They desperately tried to justify their actions, and I relentlessly dismantled each and every excuse. My frustration mounted with each passing minute, but I fought to maintain control, to not completely lose my composure. The urge to lash out was strong, fueled by the feeling that they simply weren't hearing me, weren't acknowledging the gravity of the situation they'd created. Finally, exhausted and desperate, I shifted tactics. I delivered the ultimatum, the one sentence I knew would land like a bomb. "If you don't find a way to repay that $80,000, I will be forced to pursue legal action." The color drained from Dad's face, and Mom looked as though she were on the verge of complete collapse. They started pleading with me to reconsider, to not take such a drastic step, claiming it would tear the family apart. But I was beyond being manipulated by their guilt trips, numb to their theatrics. I stated my position plainly. They either find a way to repay the money, or I will have no choice but to protect myself, to safeguard my own future. I simply can't allow this burden, born from their favoritism toward Evan, to destroy my life. Through choked sobs, Mom finally managed to say they would try to find a solution, but her words rang hollow, sounding like a mere pacifier, an attempt to appease me in the short term. Dad, still reeling from the shock of my threat, remained silent, seemingly understanding the depth of my resolve, realizing that I wouldn't back down this time. As I stood to leave, Mom called after me, her voice trembling, desperately asking if I truly intended to follow through. I turned, met her gaze directly, and replied, "If it comes down to it, yes, I will." Then, without another word, I walked out, refusing to look back. The drive home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Anger, of course, simmered beneath the surface, but it was intertwined with a deep sense of sadness, of regret. I hadn't wanted things to deteriorate to this point. But what alternative did they leave me? They painted me into an impossible corner, and now I'm forced to claw my way out. It's a horrible situation, but I know, with unwavering certainty, that I must do what is necessary to protect my own well-being, my own future. Back in my apartment, I felt utterly drained, emotionally spent. I collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling, struggling to process the whirlwind of events. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and arduous battle, and the uncertainty of the outcome weighed heavily on me. But I'm ready. Or, at least, I have to be. My mind immediately jumps to damage control, legal protections, financial survival, the gritty realities of the situation. Mostly, though, I'm just bone-tired. I wasn't expecting sunshine and roses, but I seriously underestimated the sheer weight of it all. Lying here, the truth sinks in. This is only the beginning. A long, arduous climb lies ahead, and I'll need every ounce of my strength to make it to the other side, intact. But at least the battlefield is now clear. I know what I'm facing, and retreat isn't an option. That confrontation with my parents, it was a turning point. Waiting for them to magically wave away this disaster became impossible. If I've learned anything, it's that accountability isn't exactly their strong suit. I knew then that I had to take control, to unravel the mystery of this loan myself. There's no way I'm letting this debt crush me, especially knowing half of it probably fueled Evan's lavish lifestyle, or whatever he was up to back then. So I dove headfirst into the paperwork. Definitely not my idea of a good time, but desperation is a powerful motivator. I needed to find a loophole, some way to claw back that insane $80,000. Loan agreements, bank statements, old emails, everything got pulled out and scrutinized. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but more information seemed like my only weapon. As I sifted through the documents, inconsistencies started to surface. My college bills detailing tuition didn't match the loan amounts listed. A massive discrepancy existed between what I owed for school and what was supposedly borrowed in my name. The frustration was overwhelming. The realization that my parents took out far more than necessary and kept me in the dark about it felt like a punch to the gut. But the real gut punch came when I unearthed how they accessed my bank account. Back when I was 18, I was clueless about finances. Honestly, who understands loans and banking complexities when you're just trying to navigate adulthood? So, when my parents asked me to sign some papers, I didn't hesitate. I trusted them implicitly. Huge mistake. Apparently, I signed away access to my account, giving them permission to manage my funds during college. At the time, it seemed perfectly reasonable. I thought they were just being helpful, trying to keep me from overspending or making stupid mistakes. Looking at these documents now, a cold dread settles in. $80,000. Gone. They just took it. No discussion, no asking, nothing. The realization stings. It feels like I was deliberately underestimated, my lack of financial savvy exploited. With each passing moment, my anger escalates, but beneath it lies a profound sense of betrayal. These are my parents. They're supposed to protect me, not engineer my downfall. How could they put me in this position? But despair isn't an option. In a way, their actions have ignited something in me, a stubborn refusal to be defeated. I'm diving into research, scouring the internet, desperate to find a way to undo what they've done. I know it's a long shot, a desperate gamble, but I have to try. I learn about disputing unauthorized transactions, a glimmer of hope amidst the fear. But the process is complex, riddled with deadlines. The fear claws at me. Has too much time already passed? Still, I persist, digging deeper. While wrestling with the legal jargon and online forms, my thoughts inevitably turn to Evan. He's been floating along, blissfully unaware, while I'm drowning in this financial nightmare. It's infuriating. He's my brother, yes, but I'm sick and tired of constantly cleaning up after him. It's time he faced some consequences. I decide I'm going to confront him, directly and honestly. I'm done with Mom and Dad shielding him from responsibility. I need to know where that money went, and if there's any chance, however slim, that he'll contribute to paying it back. Realistically, I know Evan's track record. Responsibility isn't exactly his forte. Regardless, I have to try. So, I make up my mind to wait for him one night. He usually gets home well after midnight. I brew myself a pot of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the quiet kitchen as I sit waiting. Mom and Dad are already asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing. It's the perfect opportunity to catch him alone. When I finally hear his car crunching on the gravel driveway, my heart leaps into my throat. I have no idea how this conversation will unfold, but I'm bracing myself for whatever comes next. He walks through the door, and I try to maintain a veneer of normalcy. I offer him coffee, and we start with casual chatter, school, work, the mundane details of our lives. I'm carefully circling the real issue, trying to ease into the conversation about the missing money without detonating the situation immediately. He didn't seem to suspect anything, which at least was a small mercy. Conflict makes him uncomfortable. He's always avoided it like the plague. Probably thought I just wanted to catch up. After the small talk, I finally broached the subject, the loan. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, if he even understood the mess I was in, the financial burden created by the money our parents had funneled his way. His blank stare infuriated me. How could he be so completely oblivious? I laid it all out, spelled it out in painful detail. The $80,000. The loan. Me, the one responsible for repayment. He just sat there, looking increasingly bewildered. Finally, he mumbled, "What money?" I never got $80,000. That's when my composure shattered. My voice rose several octaves as I explained, practically screamed, that our parents had taken out this massive loan in my name and then handed the proceeds directly to him. He blinked, his expression vacant. Then, a slow dawning. Oh, that. I just thought they gave me some money to help out. Help out? He thought $80,000 was a casual handout? The absurdity choked me. What did you do with it? I demanded, my voice trembling. He shrugged, that infuriatingly nonchalant shrug. I don't know, he mumbled. Trips, maybe? Going out with friends. You know, just stuff. Stuff. Was he deliberately trying to provoke me? He'd casually blown through $80,000 on vacations and frivolous entertainment while I was drowning in debt? Words can't adequately describe the volcanic eruption of fury building inside me. I unleashed a torrent of pent-up rage, yelling that he was responsible, that he needed to repay the loan. His response was to stare at me as if I'd sprouted wings. It's not my fault, he said, his tone almost whiny. Mom and Dad gave it to me. I didn't ask for it. The blood drained from my face. That's when it hit me, the stark realization that he felt absolutely no remorse. He wasn't even remotely concerned that his actions were destroying my financial future. He was just going to blithely continue with his life. Consequences be damned. I was done. I couldn't subject myself to another minute of this infuriating denial. I told him, icily, that I wouldn't pay a single cent of that $80,000. And if he didn't find a way to repay it, I wouldn't hesitate to pursue legal action. I walked out, leaving him sitting there, a monument to his own oblivious selfishness. He just laughed, that dismissive chuckle that always gets under my skin. Good luck with that, he said, and I knew arguing was pointless. I practically fled the kitchen, slamming the door behind me without a word. Good night? Forget it. My anger was a physical thing, a knot in my stomach that stole my breath. How had my life become this? How had I ended up with a brother so indifferent in parents who seemed perfectly content to use me as their personal bank? Back in my apartment, I collapsed on the bed, utterly depleted. Sleep, however, remained elusive. My mind replayed the conversation, each word, each careless shrug from Evan, fueling my frustration. I knew I couldn't just let it go, not this time. But the path forward was a blurry mess. One thing, though, was crystal clear. The days of playing the docile daughter were over. If they thought they could continue to manipulate me, they were sorely mistaken. I wasn't backing down, and I wasn't giving up. The time for that was long past. After that whole disastrous encounter with Evan, I was back in my apartment, desperately trying to regain some semblance of calm. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. No matter how hard I tried to reason with the situation, to find some logical explanation, it just spiraled further into absurdity. My parents refused to acknowledge their part in this mess. Evan was acting like it was some minor inconvenience, and I was the one drowning under the weight of their choices. It was beginning to feel like I was fighting a solitary war, and the exhaustion was bone deep. But I'm not wired to be a doormat. If they honestly believed I was going to blindly pay off this $170,000 debt without a fight, they were about to learn a very harsh lesson. I couldn't continue on this reactive path, constantly putting out the fires they carelessly started. I needed to take control, establish some firm boundaries, and make it unequivocally clear that I wasn't playing games anymore. I decided to offer my parents one last opportunity to make amends, to take responsibility, before I escalated things. I was done with the endless cycle of empty promises, flimsy excuses, and manipulative guilt trips. Either they helped me fix this, or I was going to be forced to take drastic action. I knew it was a gamble, a potentially explosive confrontation, but I felt like I had nothing left to lose. I picked up the phone and called them, telling them I needed to come over. My mom sounded apprehensive, almost like she anticipated something. I didn't offer any details, just a clipped, "We need to talk," and a curt, "I'll be there soon." I was trying to project an image of controlled composure, but inside, I was a tangled mess of nerves. I had no idea how they would react, but I knew I had to do this. Arriving at their house, I was greeted with the same carefully constructed facade of normalcy. They're settled in the living room, the television flickering, acting as if everything is perfectly normal. I join them, taking a long, deliberate breath, searching for the right approach. I know I can't come out swinging. They'll just retreat into themselves. So, I start softly, carefully outlining the situation, emphasizing the gravity of it all. Predictably, Mom begins to unravel emotionally. She's repeating the familiar refrain, how they never intended for things to escalate like this, how their intentions were purely to help Evan, how they mistakenly believed I could manage the situation. I've heard this narrative countless times, and frankly, I'm exhausted by it. I interrupt her, stating firmly that this is no longer about Evan. It's about the fact that they placed me in an untenable position and expected me to simply navigate it. Then, I deliver the ultimatum. I tell them that unless they repay the $80,000 they took out under my name for Evan's benefit, I will pursue legal action. I've done my research, and I know I have a legitimate case. I explain that their actions, borrowing in excess of my needs, utilizing my account to funnel funds to Evan, fabricating documents, all constitute grounds for a lawsuit. And if they don't rectify the situation, I'll have no other option than to protect myself. The room falls eerily silent. Mom's face suggests tears are imminent, but this time, there's a different quality to her distress. I perceive genuine panic in her eyes. Dad simply stares, his expression conveying a desperate attempt to gauge whether I'm bluffing. But I'm not. I am utterly serious, and I believe they recognize that. Dad speaks first, his voice strained but attempting a reasonable tone. He asks if there's any alternative to involving the legal system. but I'm finished with negotiations. I tell them this is their creation, their mess, and they are solely responsible for cleaning it up. I refuse to allow their misguided attempts to secure Evan's future to ruin my own life. Mom starts to plead, explaining that they lack the financial resources, that they are already struggling, and that a lawsuit would destroy our family. A flicker of guilt almost surfaces within me. But then I recall the relentless stress and anxiety they've inflicted upon me, all stemming from their initial dishonesty. I hold my ground. I inform them that I'm giving them 2 weeks to develop a concrete plan for repaying the money. If they fail to do so, I will file the lawsuit. Enough. I can't take any more discussions, any more excuses. It's always me making the sacrifices, bending over backwards for everyone. I could feel Dad's anger rising. He accused me of being unreasonable, of tearing the family apart over something as trivial as money. But I wasn't going to let him manipulate me with guilt this time. I told him, flatly, that they were the ones who had created this mess, forced my hand, and that I was simply trying to protect myself, to safeguard what was mine. The conversation dragged on, a tiresome back and forth, but I stood my ground. I repeated, again and again, that this was their responsibility, a debt they had incurred, not something that should fall on me. Finally, Dad grudgingly said they would see what they can do, his tone dripping with resentment. Mom was still weeping softly, but I couldn't muster the energy to comfort her. I know that sounds cold, but I felt utterly drained, emotionally and physically exhausted by their choices. I left their house feeling emptied, yet also with a strange sense of relief. I truly believed I had done everything in my power to give them a fair chance, a reasonable opportunity to rectify their mistakes. If they didn't, if they chose to ignore the consequences, then I would have to proceed with what I had threatened. It wasn't my desire, but it was the only avenue left open to me. The next few days were spent in a state of anxious waiting, constantly glancing at my phone, hoping it would ring with news that they had miraculously found a solution. Instead, I received only a few pleading texts from Mom, begging me to reconsider, painting a picture of how difficult this was for them, how they were consumed with worry about the future of our family. But I remained resolute. I simply reminded her of the deadline, 2 weeks. That was all the time they had left. As the days dwindled, I began mentally and practically preparing for the worst possible outcome. I meticulously gathered all the documents I had uncovered, copies of emails, bank statements, any piece of evidence that could potentially strengthen my case should this escalate to a legal battle. I even consulted with a lawyer, just to ensure I was fully prepared for whatever came next. It felt surreal, like I was preparing for a war against my own flesh and blood, but I knew, deep down, that it was a necessary act of self-preservation. My friends and my girlfriend were clearly concerned about me. They offered unwavering support, but they also repeatedly asked if I was absolutely certain I wanted to proceed with this action. It was a valid question. After all, who willingly chooses to sue their own parents? But my response remained consistent. I didn't have a choice. They had left me with no other option. If I let this go, the consequences will haunt me for the rest of my days, financially and emotionally. The 2-week deadline I set finally arrived, and I hadn't received a single word from my parents. A sinking feeling started to creep in. Were they just planning to ignore me, hoping I'd simply give up? They seemed to underestimate my resolve. I'm not backing down from this. I sent my mom one last text, a reminder of the rapidly approaching deadline, making it clear that if I didn't hear anything concrete by the end of the day, I would be filing the lawsuit first thing in the morning. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was about to cross an invisible line, a point of no return. A strange mix of emotions swirled within me, anger, of course, but also a deep sadness, a knot of fear in my stomach, and, surprisingly, a small sense of relief. I had bent over backwards, offering them every chance to resolve this peacefully. Now, whatever happens next is entirely on them. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mom. It was brief, just a few lines, but the message was clear. We're working on gathering the money. Please don't take any action yet. We need to talk soon. It wasn't exactly the clean resolution I'd been desperately hoping for, but it was something. At least I knew they were finally taking me seriously, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. I texted back, giving them one more week to come up with a solid, actionable plan. If they did, I would hold off on filing the lawsuit, giving them the benefit of the doubt. But if they were just stalling, I wouldn't hesitate to proceed. For now, all I could do was wait, a torturous exercise in patience, and see what they came up with. I'm hoping, perhaps foolishly, that they'll finally choose to do the right thing, but I'm not holding my breath, preparing myself for the inevitable. Either way, I'm bracing myself for whatever comes next. This is far from over. This chapter of my life is still being written, but the weight on my shoulders has shifted, just slightly. Following that last text from my mom, I was left in this bizarre, agonizing limbo, constantly questioning if they were genuinely making an effort to rectify the situation or simply trying to buy more time with empty promises. The uncertainty was infuriating, but I was actively trying to keep myself grounded, to maintain a sense of equilibrium. I knew I needed to be prepared for any outcome, whether it was them finally fulfilling their obligations or me having to pursue this legal battle. Days trickled by, agonizingly slow, and I heard absolutely nothing. Not a single word from my parents, and it was slowly driving me insane. I found myself constantly checking my phone, obsessively refreshing my inbox, waiting for a text, a call, anything at all that would break the silence. I was trying to be patient, to give them the space they ostensibly needed, but it was incredibly difficult when I felt like my entire future was hanging precariously in the balance. I started dwelling on the damage this situation was inflicting on my relationship with them, how it was crumbling before my eyes, and the heartbreaking realization that there was likely no turning back to the way things used to be. It's not like I want to feel this way, not after everything they've put me through. But the sheer weight of it all is just crushing. Then, just when I think I can catch my breath, the phone rings. It was late, I was practically asleep, and seeing Dad's name flash across the screen sent a jolt of dread through me. I answered, hoping maybe, just maybe, he was calling to apologize. No such luck. Before I could even manage a hello, he was shouting, accusing me of ripping the family apart, calling me selfish, rattling off a list of all the sacrifices they'd made for me, and how dare I repay them like this. I struggled to stay calm, the sleepiness fading fast, replaced by a familiar, sinking feeling. It was like being bombarded with every guilt trip he'd ever thrown my way, all amplified into one furious outburst. He said things like, "Do you want to be responsible if your mother ends up in the hospital and your brother's already struggling? Do you have to make things even harder for him?" The same tired arguments, but laced with a new level of desperation, a frantic edge I hadn't heard before. I let him run his course, trying to formulate a response that wouldn't ignite the situation further. It was hard. Finally, I managed to say, "Dad, this isn't about tearing the family apart. It's about fairness. You put me in a position where I have to protect myself, and that's exactly what I'm doing." Of course, he wouldn't hear it. The yelling continued, the accusations of being unreasonable, of causing unnecessary stress, the demand that I just let it go and trust them to fix it. But how can I trust them? Not after the lies, the manipulation, the way they've taken advantage of me. Now, they were trying to paint me as the villain for daring to stand up for myself. I told him that I'd given them more than enough chances to set things right, and that if they didn't come up with the money, I'd have no choice but to follow through with my plans. He only got angrier, his voice rising to a furious pitch. I cut him off, saying, "Dad, this conversation is going nowhere. My decision is made, and I'm not backing down." He slammed the phone down, leaving me staring at the screen, the silence ringing in my ears. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the stomach. It hurts. God, it hurts, but deep down I know I'm doing the only thing I can.